What happens when the playground bully graduates to geopolitics? You get this. If Donald Trump can threaten to buy, annex, or otherwise absorb Greenland today, he can threaten Canada tomorrow. Let's stop pretending this is speculation. It is no longer a fringe theory or a late-night joke. It is a pattern. A clear, observable, and frankly, terrifying pattern of behavior that has finally shaken the world from its slumber. In the span of just a few days, the Trump administration has launched destabilizing strikes in Venezuela, overseen the dramatic capture of its president, and then, without a hint of irony or self-awareness, pivoted to discussing the outright annexation of Greenland. And let's be clear about what Greenland is. It is not some forgotten parcel of land up for grabs. It is a sovereign territory, a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a fellow NATO member, a territory protected by decades of international law, and a linchpin in the security of the entire Arctic region. This toxic combination of military adventurism in the south and colonialist fantasy in the north has shattered a fragile and frankly dangerous assumption that far too many world leaders were still clutching onto like a security blanket. The assumption that Donald Trump's words were just that. Words. Bluster for his base, noise for the news cycle, but ultimately harmless. We now know, with chilling certainty, that they are not. His words are trial balloons. They are probes, sent out to test the defenses of international order to see what will bend and what will break. And that is precisely why Canada is moving. Not with panic, but with purpose. Urgently, deliberately, and in lockstep with our allies in Europe. Just yesterday, Prime Minister Mark Carney's plane touched down in Paris. The official schedule said these were routine diplomatic meetings, the kind of handshakes and photo calls that fill the calendars of any world leader. But the reality on the ground was something else entirely. What was supposed to be routine became radical. What was scheduled became spontaneous. Those polite conversations behind closed doors morphed into emergency talks, frantic alliance coordination, and a dawning, collective realization that is as simple as it is stark. If the world does not find the courage to respond to this together, then no single country, no matter how strong or how principled, is safe responding to it alone. So let us be absolutely clear. This is not about Greenland. Not really. This is about the moment the unthinkable becomes thinkable. It's about what happens when the very concept of annexation, a relic of 19th century empires, is suddenly resurrected and normalized in the 21st. It's about who has the courage to stand up and say no, absolutely not, before the first domino falls. Because once it does, history teaches us they all start to fall, one by one. So where did the first real, public sign of this new urgency appear? It came when Prime Minister Carney stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister of Denmark. Suddenly, the abstract threat became intensely personal. After all, is Greenland a theoretical issue for Canada? Is it some distant problem on the other side of the world? Of course not. Canada is an Arctic nation. We share the Arctic with Greenland. We don't just share a region. We share a maritime border stretching for 3,000 kilometers. We share NATO responsibilities to defend that exact space. And perhaps more than any other country on Earth, besides Denmark itself, Canada understands a fundamental truth: that Arctic security is not separate from our national security. It is our national security. Our sovereignty is written in that ice. So when Carney stood there, in what he called a little corner of Canada in Europe, his words were layered with a century of shared history. Prime Minister, welcome. Welcome to this little corner of Canada in Europe. We have a big relationship between Canada and Denmark, amongst other things. We share a border, a maritime border of 3,000 kilometers. Long trading relationship, diplomatic relationship, security relationship, obviously through NATO, through your presidency also of the Arctic Council, and our participation through the Nordic-Baltic Plus. This wasn't just diplomatic pleasantry. It was a strategic reminder. It was Carney, in his understated but firm Canadian way, reminding the world, and specifically reminding Washington, that Denmark is not alone. that Greenland is not isolated, that an attack on the sovereignty of one is an attack on the stability of the entire region, and Canada is standing guard. In that moment, with the world's cameras rolling, what mattered more than anything was absolute, unshakable clarity. And Carney delivered it. He made it explicit that the future of Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland. The people of Denmark. Full stop. Not to Washington, not to the White House, and not to the whims of any external power with delusions of grandeur. That was not symbolic language. That was a line being etched into the ice. It was a declaration that the fundamental principles of self-determination are not negotiable. This is the unspoken reality, the cold, hard truth that is driving Canada's entire response. And why is this response so forceful, so immediate? Because Canada has seen this movie before. A year ago, Trump wasn't talking about Greenland. He was talking about us, about Canada. Do you remember? Floating the absolutely ludicrous idea of annexation, musing about Canada as the 51st state, framing our very sovereignty, our national identity, as something that was somehow up for discussion, as if a country can be bought and sold like one of his failing casinos. At the time, perhaps some in Europe dismissed it as another one of Trump's bizarre outbursts. But Canada didn't. We saw it for what it was. He tests boundaries. He pushes and prods to see which ones are solid and which ones are rotten. He wants to know who will push back. European leaders are now finally seeing what Canada saw from the very beginning. And that is precisely why Carney's tone in Europe was not casual or relaxed. It was the tone of a leader who has been preparing for this moment. It was defensive, yes, but also deliberate, measured, and resolute. That seriousness, that gravity, intensified when the questions turned from the theoretical to the tactical. When a journalist asked about the possibility of military force being used to annex Greenland, think about that. The world is now forced to ask if a NATO country would use its military to seize territory from another NATO country. This is the world that Donald Trump is creating. And Carney's response was a masterclass in strategic communication. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't angry. It was legal. It was strategic. And it was absolute. A reporter asked, "I just want to pick up on what Christina was talking with you about a moment ago on Greenland. The Danish Prime Minister has said that any type of military force used to annex Greenland would be the end of NATO. Do you concur with that assessment?" Carney's reply was methodical. "Well, let me reiterate what I said to Mr. Noel, which is that the future of Greenland is a decision for Greenland and for Denmark exclusively. It's their decision." He starts by reinforcing the core principle. Sovereignty. It's not his decision. It's not Trump's decision. It's theirs. Then he pivots. Secondly, from a NATO context, the way I would frame it is that the western flank of NATO, which would include Greenland, the Arctic, is given the evolving threat environment is an area that we as NATO, Canada, obviously importantly given our geography, need to invest more. This is brilliant. He doesn't just agree that it would break NATO. He reframes the entire issue. He elevates it. Greenland isn't just Denmark's problem. It's part of the western flank of NATO. It's everyone's problem. It's America's problem. It's Canada's problem. He turns Trump's predatory move into a catalyst for strengthening the very alliance Trump seeks to undermine. He's telling the world that this threat has only reminded us of the importance of collective defense in the North. And then he brings it home, showing that Canada is putting its money where its mouth is. This is a point that we've been making in recent years and since I became Prime Minister that we've really stressed. And with our build-up, that's just beginning of our military capabilities. We are making heavy investments in the Arctic. We'll be working with our Nordic partners. We'll be working through NATO. This is one of the issues I'll be discussing with the Secretary General as part of an ongoing discussion with him around this to further advance it. The follow-up question was even more pointed, referencing one of Trump's most notorious advisors. That's Stephen Miller, who is a senior advisor to President Trump has refused to rule out military force in the annexation of Greenland. Does that trouble you? Carney could have taken the bait. He could have condemned Miller, creating a firestorm. Instead, he deftly sidestepped the palace intrigue to focus on what truly matters. I didn't see the specific comments that Mr. Miller may have made. Look, to take a step back. We're partners in NATO. It is a mutual defense alliance. We can provide that security. And when we look at a couple there's basic principles here, which is self-determination, of nation sovereignty, territorial integrity. He refused to be dragged into the mud with a political advisor. Instead, he anchored Canada's entire position, and by extension, the entire international coalition's position, in the bedrock fundamentals of global order: self-determination, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. This wasn't just a clever response to a question about Donald Trump. This was a clear and unambiguous warning to anyone in the world who was watching. A message that annexation by force, whether in the Arctic or anywhere else, would not be tolerated. It would not be normalized, and it would not be excused by the international community. As the discussions in Europe continued, Carney kept expanding the frame, hammering this point home again and again. When asked a second time about Greenland and Venezuela, he was even more direct. With regards to the future of Greenland, this will be a decision for the people of Greenland and Denmark. You only them Greenland and Denmark. Secondly, with regards to the role of NATO for a long time now, and during my period as Prime Minister, Canada's position has been that we need to invest in Arctic security. The Canadian Arctic, the Arctic next to Greenland, and also the Nordic space. We are making progress within NATO, but we have to do more. We have to do more. And I will have a discussion this afternoon with the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Rutte, with regards to this. There it is again. The 1-2 punch. First, reaffirming sovereignty. Second, defining the Arctic as a collective NATO responsibility where Canada is a leading voice and investor. This is where Canada's deep-seated concern becomes unmistakable. For decades, the Arctic was seen as a quiet, frozen frontier. That time is over. It is now a strategic frontline. Melting ice is opening new shipping routes. Untapped resources are becoming accessible. And nations like Russia and China are militarizing their presence at an alarming rate. Donald Trump's clumsy, transactional language about buying a piece of it has only accelerated this dangerous new reality, pouring fuel on an already smoldering fire. This is why the symbolism of Carney's trip was just as important as the substance. He didn't just speak about NATO from a podium in Ottawa. He flew to Europe and stood beside its leadership. The images of him with the Secretary General of NATO were broadcast around the globe. It's a great pleasure to welcome the Secretary General of NATO. He's doing, and I'm going to add a point, amazing work at a critical time from getting us all to step up and have resources for not just today, but in the medium term, for the new threat environment, but also bringing that unique expertise and diplomacy and political skill that's helping to navigate incredible progress that has been made towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. That visual, that public endorsement, sends a single powerful message. Canada is not freelancing. Canada is not acting alone. Canada is coordinating, consulting, and aligning itself with the very structures of collective security that have kept the peace for over 70 years. It is a direct rebuke to Trump's philosophy of unilateral power plays and America First isolationism. When Prime Minister Carney speaks of a new threat environment, this is exactly what he means. The threat isn't just a specific country. It's the erosion of the alliances and principles that keep predatory behavior in check. And then came the final, most revealing moment of the trip. A moment that stood out because it's where Mark Carney's message became so unmistakably, powerfully Canadian. The conversation shifted to energy. A reporter, trying to frame the world through Trump's lens, brought up the recent military action in Venezuela. The implication was clear. With Venezuelan oil now potentially under American influence, where does that leave Canada? And Carney's response was nothing short of a strategic masterstroke. Rather than accepting the premise that Trump's actions in Venezuela somehow define the global energy market, Carney flipped the entire argument on its head. He made it crystal clear that Canada does not need permission from anyone, does not need justification, and certainly does not need a comparison to a failed state to stand proudly on its own. The question was posed. President Trump has said one of the key reasons that he went into Venezuela was to get the oil out. Do you think this will impact the Canadian oil sector? And does that increase the need in your estimation to have a pipeline to the northwest coast of BC? Carney began by addressing Venezuela directly, with principle. Well, I'll say a couple things. One is that, from our perspective, the removal of an illegitimate, corrupt, repressive government or leader, Mr. Maduro, is welcome news. It creates the possibility for democratic transition in Venezuela. We very much support that. He establishes Canada's moral position first. Support for democracy, not for a resource grab. He then acknowledges the obvious economic reality. Now, a functioning, not corrupt, Venezuelan economy will produce more oil. It'll be better for the Venezuelan people. It'll be more stable for the Western Hemisphere. That's all a good thing. This is smart. It shows he's a global statesman, not a narrow protectionist. But then he pivots to Canada. And this is where his argument becomes devastatingly effective. Canadian oil. Canadian energy. But I'll speak because you asked specifically about Canadian oil. It's been our view, and we're working towards this, that Canadian oil will be competitive because it is low risk. Clearly low risk, low cost. The marginal costs been huge progress in getting down the cost and low carbon, which is what the Pathways project, carbon capture, will bring. And that makes Canadian oil competitive. Canadian oil competitive for the medium and long term. Low risk, low cost, low carbon. That isn't just a slogan. It's a direct contrast to everything Trump represents. What is the single greatest risk in the world today? Political instability driven by impulsive leaders. Carney is arguing that Canadian energy is the antidote. It is produced under the stable rule of law. It is backed by predictable regulations and a democratic government. It is not subject to the whims of a dictator or the overnight military adventures of a volatile president. He continues, linking this inherent stability to Canada's strategic goals. We also see the competitiveness of Canadian oil. And we're investing, or we're putting in place measures so that that's going to happen. And in that context, a pipeline and exports to Asia. We've got competitive product, and we'd be diversifying our markets, and that's one of the reasons why we signed the comprehensive with Alberta. So we'll be working towards that. He acknowledged that a stable Venezuela's oil sector should and will prosper. That stability and economic growth are in everyone's interest. But he was equally, unshakably clear about something else. Canadian oil is already in demand, not as a replacement for chaos, but as an alternative to it. It is trusted, it is stable. It is produced under a system of laws and ethics that the world can count on. Carney's point was subtle, but incredibly powerful. Donald Trump's attempts to reshape global energy politics through military force and intimidation do not diminish Canada's position in the world. They strengthen it. They highlight our value. As instability and unpredictability rise everywhere else, Canada's stability, Canada's resources, and Canada's principles become more valuable, not less. This wasn't bravado. This wasn't wishful thinking. It was a statement of confidence rooted in reality. In that moment, Mark Carney wasn't just defending Canadian resources. He was defending Canada's entire brand, our relevance, our reliability, and our growing leverage in a world that seems to be becoming more volatile by the day. And the message, to Washington and to the world, was clear. Canada will not be pushed aside. Canada will not be undercut by strongman tactics. And Canada will not allow its future to be overshadowed by chaos manufactured elsewhere. So let's bring it all back. Mark Carney's emergency meetings in Europe weren't about theatrics or photo opportunities. They were about something far more serious. They were about prevention. Canada, standing with its allies, understands something absolutely fundamental about this moment in history. If the world responds to Donald Trump's provocations country by country, picking us off one by one, then each one of us is vulnerable. But if democracies respond together, if we reaffirm our shared values and our collective security, then the boundaries will hold. The rule of law will prevail. Greenland is the test case. Europe is the meeting ground. And Canada, thankfully, is no longer waiting on the sidelines to see what happens next. We are at the table, leading the conversation because we know, perhaps better than most, that once annexation threats and bullying tactics become normal, no country is too close, too friendly, or too secure to become the next target. Share your opinion in the comments. If you find this video interesting, please hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything.
If you find this video interesting, please hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything.
It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar gamble, but if it pays off, it changes everything. If Canada can build a first-rate Arctic surveillance system without the US, who else might want to buy it? Suddenly, Canada isn't just a customer. They are a competitor. And that is a role the US, especially under this administration, is absolutely not ready to see them in. Share your opinion in the comments. If you find this video interesting, please hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything.